Okay, I can see people are answering. Okay, I can see most people are coming from civil society or other sectors. And in terms of geography, I can see many people from Serbia or other European countries. Someone from MENA and even North America. Great. Okay, 1 more minute for the poll. Okay, I think everybody has answered. Thank you very much. And now let me put up the presentation for our speakers. You should be able to see it in a second. And I will give the floor to our speakers from Europol, Brian Donald, the head of the cabinet, and Loredana Doblaga, who is the lead analyst. If you don't see the presentation in 5 seconds, please write it to me in the chat. Thank you.
So, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Brian Donald. I'm Head of Cabinet, Chief of Staff at Europol, the European Police Agency. I'm accompanied by Loredana from Focal Point Phoenix and Paula from my office in the Director's office.
Jeff.
I also have Jeff, who's our technical advisor, should everything fall to pieces. So I just want to give you a brief introduction about Europol and then hand you over to Loredana, who will speak about the specifics of what you're doing, or what we're doing. Some of you will have seen the reporting over the last days, which is relevant and topical to our discussion this afternoon about Europol speaking about the problem of unaccompanied minors going missing in the system in relation to the migrant crisis. The figure of 10,000 is the estimate from the journalist. I didn't disagree with that. But of course the main point of the article was to raise awareness of the problem that we all face in managing the migrant crisis, and in particular in dealing with the problem of unaccompanied minors. So this is our fancy new headquarters in The Hague in the Netherlands. It's 3 years old, paid for and built by the Dutch government as part of the headquarters agreement that we have with them, and we are very grateful for their support. We have about 900 persons working at Europol, of which 180 are liaison officers drawn from member states and third countries, and the vast majority, about 700, are Europol employees, of which the largest proportion works in our operations department. We have a small governance department and we have a small IT department, but the vast majority of our resources are focused on operational work and operational support. So I'm not going to give you a very long presentation. This is my presentation, so I'll concentrate on the sort of headline issues. So we've been in existence for about 15 years. We're a European agency since 2010, when the Commission took over responsibility for funding us. Prior to that, we had been an intergovernmental organisation funded by individual contributions from the member states. As I've said, we're divided into three sections: the governance section, the IT section, and the largest part is the part that's of interest to you, which is the operations section. We have three headline issues that we are working on a daily basis within a mandate which extends to all serious organised crime which affects two or more member states. So basically everything that's transnational in terms of serious and organised crime falls within our mandate. But the three things that are of particular focus for the organisation are illegal immigration, then we'll speak more about that later, counter-terrorism, and the third one is cybercrime. So if I deal with them in reverse order, cybercrime, a relatively new phenomena, so much so that we established a new centre within Europol some 3 years ago, the European Cybercrime Centre, commonly known as EC3. We have about 60 officers working there on cybercrime, on all types of cybercrime, working with the national units who are dealing with cybercrime in the individual countries, and also providing a sort of pan-European response to cybercrime, in which we're working with partners overseas, particularly the US, who have a large interest in cyber because they host many of the services that are either used by criminals or, more importantly, attacked by criminals. It's a major piece of our work, and the important thing in relation to DD is that EC3 established a new way of working within Europol, in which we had a centre of specialism which fits within the overall Europol structure. And that's relevant because only last week we launched ECTC, the European Counter-Terrorism Centre, in response to the attacks. Actually, the Charlie Hebdo attacks in January of 2015, but of course the development was accelerated following the attacks in Beirut and in Paris in late 2015, November 2015. So we have a new centre, European Counter-Terrorism Centre, which is very much engaged in looking at the problem of foreign terrorist fighters, of the problem of homegrown terrorism within the European Union, and how we collectively, as the EU and partners, can address that. Later this month, we launched the third of the centres at Europol in relation to our priority work, which will be the European Migrant Smuggling Centre. And again, an initiative asked of us by the European Union, by the Council, by the Commission, in response to the tragic events that are associated with the migrant crisis that we're all dealing with. In particular, the role of organised crime as the facilitators, as the enablers of the migrant flows. So we're working closely with partners in many of your countries, with all the EU member states, and with third parties, Commission, NGOs, and others. We're very busy. It won't surprise you to hear that. We're very busy. We have an increasing number of demands placed upon us by politicians, by national administrations, by operational officers, by investigators. And I think the reason for the fact that we're very busy is primarily because we're actually quite good at what we do. We've secured a position within the law enforcement community which is respected in terms of transnational investigations, in terms of multinational crime types. And as we've grown up, as we've matured as an organisation, the demands that are placed upon us continue to increase. One of the areas that we've got a lot of experience in is human trafficking. The other one is illegal immigration. And that last point, that takes us down to the subject of today's webinar. And I'll now hand over to Loredana to give you an explanation of what we're doing in terms of this issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Brian. Good afternoon to everybody. I'm Loredana Doblaga, and I'm a lead analyst in a team working on trafficking human beings at Europol. I will start my presentation with just a clarification on three concepts which will be brought into discussion today. Facilitating illegal immigration, trafficking in human beings, and the refugee crisis. So the facilitating illegal immigration is a crime against state, and people are transported illegally over borders, and after entering the country they want, they are left alone. When we speak about trafficking in human beings, this is a crime against person. People, they are transported from one place to another, not necessarily over borders, and they are further exploited. What we have, a part of these two crimes, we have the refugee phenomenon, when people fleeing from war zones, they are asking for asylum in member states, and then they become vulnerable to human trafficking. What I will start also is just a brief introduction on what is it trafficking in human beings. We speak about and it's also regulated at European level and also in the states, in the countries, that we speak about an act like recruitment, transportation, harboring, reception of persons using different means, and they are shown as you see in the slide, or by threat, or using the force, or by coercion, or abduction, and you can see all of them. And the purpose is the exploitation. When it comes to children, as it is regulated in the European Directive 36, these means, what you can see above, they are irrelevant. So when it comes to children, it's enough to have only the recruitment, the act, the recruitment, transportation, and the reception, and the purpose, the exploitation at the end. And I think this is very important for us to see that when we speak about children, all the EU regulations and all the authorities in the states, in the member states, in the countries, they focus on protection of children. What we look further at is different forms of exploitations, like sexual exploitation, labor exploitation, forced criminality, sham marriages, domestic servitude, removal of organs, and illegal adoption. You might think that, for example, sham marriages, it was in the past a crime related, or a tool related to illegal immigration, when third nationals from third countries, they were entering EU, and by marrying a EU national, they were getting the status of that respective EU country, and they were legally in that country. So this was just a brief explanation on the forms of exploitation we focus here at Europol. Just to explain you briefly on what we are doing exactly, we support the member states in conducting their investigations, and we support their cooperation. We bring them together at the same table here at Europol, and we find a common way to tackle a certain organized criminal group. And then, of course, as Brian said already, here at Europol, we have liaison officers also from third countries, like Albania, like Serbia, like Moldova. They are here, and all together we cooperate in cases where we tackle this phenomenon, trafficking human beings. The most common form of exploitation in the EU, and this one is reported by the member states, is sexual exploitation. And here we have EU nationals and also third country nationals exploited in this form. We see also both street and off-street prostitution. Recruitment also is very easy to be done because it works or via internet or in the circle of persons in their entourage. They know each other and they spread the word. Victims usually are trafficked and exploited by their connationals. And one other feature that this form of exploitation has is that in some OCG, or organized criminal groups, women may play a key role. This is just an introduction in the form of exploitation, how we see it at European level, from all the contributions, from all the information and all the cases member states refer to us. You have to be aware that member states, they provide these cases willingly. We don't ask, or we don't, they are not obliged to report to us all the cases they are working on, because according to our mandate, we support serious organized crime and we support cases where the transnational element is existing. So we have more than 2 member states involved. When it comes to other forms of exploitation, labor exploitation is the second form existing, most reported. And then we have here victims exploited in the vegetable picking sector, in the textile industry, in the construction work, in a word, low-skilled labor. There is the majority of the victims they are reported to us. The recruitment phase is done through newspapers, word of mouth. This is also very common, and also via local employment agencies. Another feature of this form of exploitation is that victims might be trafficked by their connationals, but when they are exploited, they can be exploited by their connationals, but also the nationals of country of destination. When we refer to the form of exploitation of forced criminality, we are looking into pickpocketing, ATM assaults, thefts or petty thefts, but also we are looking after cannabis cultivation, so drugs trafficking. This pickpocketing aspect was appeared maybe 2-3 years ago. We notice it also at the European level, like an increasing, like a trend. And then at that moment, we issued a strategic report. You can find it also on our website, where we addressed the member states this form of exploitation using children. So pickpocket children exploited through pickpocketing by criminal organized groups. This is just to make connections also with the topic of our seminar today on children. Some other forms of exploitation, what we can say about them is benefit fraud for fraudulent social benefit claims. And sometimes we notice that the organized criminal groups, they don't even need the victims here for a long time. They bring them here. They go with them to all the services in that country. They go with them to the bank. They open accounts. And when everything is ready and money starts to be put in their accounts, the victims are sent back home, and the criminals, they just collect the revenues from the services, social services authorities. And then this form of exploitation can be found in connection with other forms of exploitation. What we notice also that the criminals, they take each opportunity to gain money. So it doesn't matter if this is something new. If they spot an opportunity, they will grab it, they will take it, and they will use it. On sham marriages, as I already said, we see mostly women, EU nationals, forced into marriages with the third countries' nationals. And then when these sham marriages, it becomes a form of exploitation and trafficking human being crime only when there is the coercion element, so that person, the EU national, is forced to get into that marriage. Now I will go to tell you some words about current trends we notice at the European level. As I said, human trafficking for sexual exploitation is the most reported in EU. The majority of traffickers are male. Women are involved mainly in low-ranking tasks in this crime. Sexual exploitation often occurs, or it happens on street prostitution, in brothels, in clubs, in small apartments, in hotels. And lately, we notice that also escort services are used by criminal organized groups to move the victims and to put the services of the victims in the favor of clients. They just keep the victims in some hotels. They keep the profile on the internet, online, and they make appointments directly online with the clients. And the victims, when there is the time of appointment, they are moved from the hotel to the place where the client lives. When it comes to labor exploitation, this tends to take place in intensive or under-regulated industries, and I put in the brackets some of them. And then here we see a lot of EU nationals and also third nationals. And another trend we notice is that internet is increasingly used as a facilitator of human trafficking. And when we see that this is a trend, when we say this, is because we saw that internet appears more and more in all the stages, all the steps of human trafficking. We find internet in the recruitment phase. We find internet linked to the transportation phase. We find also internet when the exploitation happens. What I said already, that in the escort business, this internet is a tool to make appointments and just then to move the clients, to move the victims from one place to another. But what happens? Why victims come and which are the factors why victims are getting into this human trafficking? I just put here some push factors and pull factors. We noticed and we saw, and we also put it in our strategic reports, that push factors are, for example, family problems, when there are economic problems in the family, when there exists a violent and abusive situation in that family where there is a lack of education, so simply adults or children, they are not aware about what's the reality and what can happen to them. Unemployment is also a push factor for labor exploitation or also sexual exploitation, gender or other discrimination, and at the end, of course, we have conflict and war zones in relation to the refugee phenomenon we face these times. When it comes to pull factors, why a person will choose to or will think about this is just because those persons, the potential victims or the victims, they think that they could have a better life, they could have a higher salary and better working conditions. Economic crisis, it's also a pull factor for people to get into human trafficking. The fact that there are a lot of diaspora communities around the world or in countries in Europe, this is a factor that facilitates the crime, because the criminals, they can get in touch easily and find a easy way to recruit people or to place the victims in a certain area. And a last factor I put there is increased demand for cheap products or services, and this is related to also to sexual exploitation and also to labor exploitation. These are just some factors to think why a person would come to end into this trafficking human beings area. And then I said, okay, let's see what happens, in fact, with these criminal networks. And I put here some features. And then, as I already said, the existence of diaspora communities in the EU, it's a facilitator for criminal networks to do their job, to do their business. It's a business. Most of the time, the victims, they don't perceive themselves as victims. They see it as they must repay the transportation or the harboring cost, and then they are lured into this way of thinking by the criminals, by their employers, or by the person who recruited them. And then thinking like this, also victims are reluctant to cooperate with law enforcement because accepting their condition, or they are instructing it or it's threatening to do so. One element of threatening for a victim is to use their proper children in the country of origin or the family they have there, and then they receive this threatening that your family will be beaten or your child will support the consequences. They go and they accept that they don't have to cooperate with law enforcement, and at that moment we lose the contact with them. Victims, the latest trend, what we notice is that victims are kept under control without so much violence. This was in the past, when violence was one main form of coercion, but now they use these soft methods or psychological intimidation, because, and also this is one of the reasons why for sexual exploitation the control is not with violence, because the victims, they don't have to have bruises on them, so signs of violence, because they are not liked again by the clients. Another feature of this is that non-EU victims mainly use forged or lookalike documents provided by their traffickers. So these criminal organized groups, networks, they are able to get documents, forged documents for their victims. They are able to get documents for work permits, and then they simply hand them over to victims when they arrive to their destination or before going on the transport mean to reach the European country. Another feature I put here is that the traffic workers, then, so we speak about labor exploitation, they use mainly legitimate identification documents, and often they have legitimate permits which expire over time. So they were in legality at a certain moment, but then when the visa expires or the permit expires, then they are more they become more vulnerable to these criminal networks. Some also we had some intelligence on falsified travel documents and misuse of tourist visa or education visa just to get into a European country. Now I was thinking, let's see what traffickers do to avoid law enforcement action. And here you can see some bullet points. So they are forcing victims to apply for asylum in transit countries because they know that they apply, they can get a certain status, maybe legal, and then they can move them freely or easier in the European Union. Forcing victims to tell false stories to police in case of detection, this is also already what I mentioned. The rotation of victims and the movement of the criminal proceeds, so the movement of money among different countries. You have to bear in mind that these criminal networks are very mobile and flexible, so they can swift from one year to another country. They sit or they settle maybe in the closeness of the borders, so they can live in one country and then the exploitation phase can happen in another country, in the neighboring country, and then this is difficult then for law enforcement to consider it and to detect the crime. The criminals, they use guards and the digital surveillance systems, so they are aware what's happening on their territory and also what's happening with their victims. They use some physical or psychological violence towards victims to keep them under control. They use a fraudulent identity document, so at a certain moment in the countries when they exchange this information, they are lost. They change frequently the vehicles, and they use cash also to avoid the tracks online. When it comes to the exploitation phase, I put here some remarks for each form of exploitation, and I will just go briefly to forced criminality, where we see most children involved. They are sent to steal, and you have to understand that a threshold value is set daily for them, and if they don't achieve that value, then they are deprived of food. Of course, they are put in a bad condition to live in, and of course, no education is allowed to them. But this I will give you, you will receive the presentation, you will have time to go through it. I see our time is almost up. I will just speed it up a little bit. When it comes to identify potential child trafficking victims, here I put some red flags or indicators for you as services, frontline services. how you could identify a potential child of trafficking. And then here you have unaccompanied children, that this is a very risk form. Then you have children not accompanied by their parents, children already victimized back in the source country or during their journey are even more exposed to further victimization. Children with disabilities, you will see them that they are risk for forced begging also into the criminal networks. Level of maturity of children is also an indicator for a potential victim. And then, so go on, we indicate some more other risk factors for a child to become a potential victim. Sorry, I will speed it up. And then here I put some challenges we face and we are aware of at law enforcement level. And of course, these include also the partners from civil society, NGOs, all the other social services. And here I just put some challenges, and I think one of them, like a language barrier, is a challenge when it comes to cooperate transnationally with other law enforcement from other country, and also lack of network or point of contact in another country is a very challenge. A challenge for social services, let's say. If you have an information and you know that something is happening, this is whom do you contact to say it or to make aware the persons. Then the last slide is on the lessons learned, what we learn from the cooperation, that international cooperation is strongly required to tackle this phenomenon. The multidisciplinary approach at national level is needed, so a law enforcement, civil society, commitment from all the actors involved is essential. Then if we are together in this, we should all commit at the same level. And the last one is that if we don't take the money the traffickers they gain, then they will be back in business the second day after their arrest or the dismantling the group. So these are just some key forces or trends or indicators for you. If you have any question, we are very happy to answer. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation, and we are open for discussion now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We have a few questions from participants. I realize the speakers didn't have time to look at the chat box, so I will read the questions now and will ask you to address them if possible. So I'm also trying to group questions. So the first one was whether you have any statistics on how many persons are convicted in the European Union for trafficking in children. And also if you have specific data relevant to child migrants or refugees who may have been trafficked.
Okay, so the first one in relation to how many people have been convicted for trafficking children. We don't have a breakdown by category of victim. What we can say is that according to Eurostat in 2014, which is the most recent figures that we have, it was 5,338 prosecuted cases in the EU. The largest category was for sexual exploitation, the second largest was for labour exploitation, and the third largest was usefully described as other types of exploitation. We're aware that Eurojust are trying to gather some statistics around that. But if I could refer to the EU strategy on trafficking in human beings, 2012-2016, the Commission certainly highlight the fact that there needs to be an increase in the levels of prosecution. I think one of the situations that we recognise within the European Union is the difficulty in collecting statistics, because we know what we do, but we're always doing transnational, multinational investigations. We're not collecting statistics on matters that are dealt with only at the national level. I've just been handed something that says that THB cases recorded as other crime will also include things like illegal entry into the country or prostitution. I think that part of our ambition at the moment is to raise awareness, particularly around the issue of children. There was a question about the source of our figures. I don't know if it is Eurostat for the figures that you were referring to, but certainly the figures that I've just given you in relation to the prosecutions is from Eurostat. How many persons are convicted in the EU for trafficking in children? Charlotte asked that question. As I explained, we don't have figures on that. I'll ask Larandira to answer the question, what do we consider to be the most common form of exploitation of children?
At this moment, we can't say exactly what is because as I said, the member states, they contribute willingly with cases, but this is not reality maybe in their country. You have to understand that these cases refer to us, or it's based on maybe on the national focus. If a country focuses on children because they have this phenomenon on children on the streets begging or involved in petty crimes, they will make a strategy at national level to tackle that phenomenon. So that's why we might receive more cases on that specific phenomenon, but it doesn't mean that we don't have young girls exploited sexually in that country. That's why we can't give you an exact or a proper response to this, but from what we see from the cases referred to us, we have also girls exploited sexually in European Union, but we have also increasing number of children used for begging or petty crimes.
So again, there was a question, do we have data relevant to child migrants, refugees who may have been trafficked? If not Europol, who? Again, I think this is a challenge of gathering statistics. I think there's lots of numbers. I mean, one of the numbers I saw yesterday was that 27% of the persons involved in the current migrant crisis are children, or young persons, or minors. So if we take a headline figure of 1 million, although it's higher than that, that's at least 270,000 of children who are travelling. Now, I'm not suggesting that anything like that number is being exploited, but it's a large pool of children. So, I mean, I think a lot of the cases that are being dealt with at the national level haven't made their way through to Europol yet. So we don't know exactly what the situation is at the national level. There was a question on children being exploited within the sort of the family environment, you know, in terms of crime. Certainly the most famous case that we dealt with here, Operation Golf, which was centred in London and other major cities in Europe. The exploitation of up to 200 children, I think, overall, over the period of the whole operation. Those children largely travelled to the UK and other European countries with the knowledge and support of their family, but not necessarily being aware that the child would be exploited in the way they were exploited on arrival. So, you know, there's a lot of duplicity and cheating going on in relation to the way that children are recruited. There was a question on the identification and constitution of proof when the exploitation has not yet taken place. So I assume, in a transit situation, I assume that's the grooming stage. I mean, I think, the law enforcement is alert to this. The simplest thing to do is to address the matter. So if it doesn't look right, it's probably wrong. And I would urge those of you who are dealing with kids in the front line to have a relationship with law enforcement so that you know who you can go to and ask and seek advice and report things and leave them to investigate. There are many very well-meaning charitable people who are trying to help. I'm not concerned about them. We are concerned about the ones who are less ill-minded towards victims. But I think communication and engaging with law enforcement and actually discussing these problems is the way forward. The age groups of exploited children, I mean, if they're old enough to be tasked, so old enough to told what to do, then they're old enough to be exploited. So that's not very old, and all the way through to 16, 18 years of age. Exploited in different ways, criminal begging. This is not some romantic Charles Dickens type thing. This is organised crime at its worst. Exploiting kids to commit a lot of crime, and because they're very young, they sort of fall through the criminal. In relation to the 10,000, I spoke about that at the very beginning. The estimate is based on reporting from member states, from national authorities, from NGOs, covering the period of the current crisis, so about 18 months to 2 years. I don't disagree. The figure came from a journalist. The important point about that is the underlying message in relation to the exposure to risk that the children face. So I think that's, I can finish there and hand back to Evgenia.
Let me look through the questions we have and see if there are some unanswered. Just give me a minute, please. I was not sure when this question was answered, but it sounds very interesting. How and in what settings or contexts victims of trafficking are usually identified and trafficking situations are detected?
Sorry, could you please repeat? I didn't understand exactly.
Yes, sure. In what setting or context victims of trafficking are usually identified and trafficking situations are detected?
So I can reply to this with, for example, when it comes to sexual exploitation, in the countries where the prostitution is legal, there are mechanisms set up by the authorities to check these prostitutes, because they should be registered with the authorities as practicing that work in that city. And then during these controls on the street, or on not on the street, in the area where they say they are working, they go and they check each person, and at that moment, if there is a person like a victim that might look not suspicious, but law enforcement officer, police officer from this area, they are trained to identify these victims. And then if there is something suspicious, if there is an adult near another person with that prostitute, then it's already a sign that something might go on. and that at that moment the prostitute and the other person, they are invited to the police station, and then starts an inquiry, why is this happening or what's happening, if they are willingly doing so. So this is an indicator and the type of action when the victims are identified. I hope this helps you or clarify you.
Thank you very much, Loredana. There are some more questions coming. Let me read them. Would forced recruitment into armed forces be included here?
No, we can say definitely not, or not at this stage.
Okay, thank you. There is some more other identification indicators adapted to the new situation, recognizing THB cases among migrants and refugees.
In relation to this question, we know that, and the answer is yes. We know that in certain countries, member states, the authorities, they started already training their law enforcement authorities, the border police. They started training their trafficking in human beings forces or illegal immigration officers on the indicators to look for when working with the migrants and assessing the migrants. So we know this is happening, and also that's why we are producing strategic reports for their use, where we indicate that a certain element might be an interest to that country or to that specific area of on THB.
So the
Okay, thank you, Loredana. Yeah, sure, go.
question about where are the children missing from? They're missing from the system. So the estimate is based on the number of children who have been registered, but who are no longer where they should be in terms of the authorities. I say again, I mean the estimate, which I do not disagree with, is based on the reporting from member states, from NGOs, from our own law enforcement authorities, of the number of children, unaccompanied minors, who are involved in the migrant crisis. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There are some more questions. How could safe and legal migration routes be established the best in order to keep an eye on the unaccompanied children?
I mean, I think that's the question that the European Union, individual member states and partner countries are wrestling with at the moment. You know, there is no safe way to cross the sea from Turkey to Greece in a rubber boat, whatever anybody tells you. There is no safe way to walk through the Balkans during the winter season. You know, I think certain steps are taken at the macro political level by member states, and that's really a question for them rather than for Europol.
Okay, thank you very much. And there are two questions that I would like to combine in one. They both refer to preventative measures that would stop children from becoming victims of trafficking. Any prevention measures that civil society actors or governments should undertake. Thank you. Give me a second to unmute you, and then you can answer the question.
What we said that, and you have to understand our position, that we are representing here law enforcement and our partners in Europe. To go with these prevention measures, and also we work closely to the civil society to identify children not to become victims of the trafficking in relation to this migration flow. But as also Brian said, it's not only up to us, it's a macro political element that should be considered, that we can do what we are tasked to do. We have a certain mandate to fill in, and then it should be agreed, maybe, or be decided how to work together. We are willing and open to cooperation with all the partners or all the NGOs, or just to find the solution to prevent children to become victims. But we can do, for example, at this moment, only what is written in our mandate.
I mean, I think the wider political issue is that, Europol seeks to be part of a whole of government response to the threat of exploitation of children or any person within the European Union or who's involved, for example, in this current migrant crisis. So we work in terms of engaging with our partners so that, we have a common understanding of what the risks are, and that's part of the reason that we've been speaking to the media recently, that we raise awareness both in law enforcement but in the wider environment with local authorities and with governments, and that this is not just a response that lies at the hands of the police. It's, as I say, it's a whole of government response.
Very much for your answer. There was also a quick question whether there is an increased cooperation between Europol and countries in the MENA region.
Yes and no. So yes, in the sense that at the level of the European Union, there is a desire to have closer relations with the MENA region, and Europol's been involved from a law enforcement perspective in that. Do we have as Europol strong relations with the MENA region at the moment? No, we don't, because in terms of our legal mandate, we're not authorised to engage with the MENA countries. However, in relation to recent events, the necessary legal amendments are being made to our mandate to allow us to do that.
Thank you. Let me look through some more questions. We have some really long questions, and I don't have time to read through them before I ask them to you. Sorry. There is a short one. Are there any characteristics by which a trafficked person can be spotted at the refugee camp?
I could answer to this question that what we learn from the cases reported to us is that traffickers might be around the refugee camps, and they might be in cars around those camps. You might see them approaching children. I mean, the different persons approaching children, and or different or yeah, but this is the most common element, that they are just going around the centers of the gate. They are approaching everyone they can. Of course, they know how to identify persons or children that can be potential victims later. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your answers. I know that our colleagues from Europol have to rush now, unfortunately. It's a real pleasure to have you with us and ask you all the questions we are interested in. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much to the participants for attending this webinar. You should be able now to see the last poll on your screen asking to evaluate this webinar. I know you have many questions unanswered. We will open a forum discussion on our website, childhub.org, where you can continue discussing the issues. And also, as you know, we will issue certificates of attendance to those of you who are interested. You can email at info.childhub.org. I will write the email in the chat box in a minute. Thank you very much and have a nice day.